It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You go to my website, emailrevealer.com, and let's say you think your boyfriend's cheating on you. You send me their email address. We track it back to online dating sites. We'll catch them cheating online. You can also get a copy of my book there, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. Also, check out OppermanReport.com. We got a special member section with additional exclusive shows that you won't hear on Friday night. You won't hear them on Saturday night. This is exclusive to the member section. Sometimes we release them to Friday or Saturday. If I can't get a guest during the week, I'll replay one of those good shows. But otherwise, it's exclusive there. And also, there's exclusive documents and court documents. We just uploaded a court case about Donald Trump, alleged court case back from the 90s. That we got a hold of, and we just threw it up there in the past week. So there's a lot of good stuff there on Opperman Report. We got the D.C. Madam's phone records, all kinds of stuff. It's unbelievable. Okay, today we have a returning guest, Cathy Scott. She was on here before talking about the murder of a mafia daughter, which in itself was an incredible, and the victim in this case was a friend of Cathy Scott's, if I recall, and murdered, we believe, by Fred Durst. So that was a whole incredible story. So I just found out recently that she's written a book. One is The Killing of Tupac Shakur, and also The Murder of Biggie Smalls, which a lot of people believe there's some kind of connection between the two. And there's a second edition coming out of The Murder of Biggie Smalls coming out shortly. So Cathy Scott, you there?
I am here.
Thank you so much for coming back. Cathy, usually people don't like to come back, but I guess you don't remember me that well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Just one point. Not Fred Durst, it's Robert Durst, who's accused of killing Susan Berman.
Well, that's an important point.
Very important to Fred, I think.
Oh, my God. Okay, Robert Durst. Okay. Hey, any developments going on with all that Robert Durst stuff that you know about?
He's being extradited. He's pleaded out to a gun charge in New Orleans. He's been held in Louisiana for the past year or so, and should be extradited soon to California to face first-degree murder charges in Los Angeles for the Susan Berman's death. That should be happening soon in August. So I'll be there in the courtroom for part of it. I'm sitting right behind Robert Durst.
So they're actually going after him for the murder of your friend.
Well, they've got enough evidence to do it, and it's about time that he got him on murder. He's committed 3.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing too that this guy, because we were talking about this over a year ago, and and then there was some time span between these crimes and the arrests and all this kind of stuff, and now here it is like a year later, and they're just getting the extradition going now, huh?
Well, yeah, he did plead out, I think, to 7 years or something. So they wanted to make sure they got him in there for something. He's 70. What is he? 70, early 70s, and not doing well physically. But I always say he's too mean to die. But so he's we'll see what kind of shape he is when he gets to the courtroom. He's had some stents put in his brain and things like that. I think he's got a cancer tumor, but it depends on who you talk to, what's wrong with him. We don't know if he's got fasciitis or what, but we'll find out soon enough.
Just an incredible, one of those stories that's too strange to believe, So I would encourage people to go back and find that old show, because there's all kind of stuff about cutting off cats' heads, dropping off at the judge's house, urinating in a drugstore. He walks into a drugstore to pay his bill, and he urinates on the candy and the newspapers in front of him.
Actually stole. Yeah, he stole. He had thousands of dollars in the trunk of his car, and I think he had $300 cash on him. He's a multimillionaire, and he stole from a drugstore. And then another time he urinated in a drugstore. He's crazy, but he's crazy as a fox. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of people think he's a very serious serial killer too.
Sociopath.
Yeah,
Yep.
Amazing. Okay.
Psychopath, probably.
And then we kind of have like the opposite of this. We got Fred Durst, 70 years old. Total.
No, Robert Durst.
Right. Gee, I'm gonna get sued. Okay, Robert Durst.
Robert Durst.
And I wrote Robert in big letters right in front of me, so I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, Robert Durst.
But then we have Tupac.
Durst is a musician. No.
Right. Who probably has not killed anybody that we can prove.
No, he hasn't.
No, Fred Durst is a very good musician. Okay. We'll plug his record at the end of the show.
Robert Durst.
But we have Cathy Scott here. Now, on the other end of this, we got Tupac Shakur, murdered at 25 years old. His whole life, just think 25. I'm 53. Whole life ahead of him, Now, you were living here in Vegas when that happened?
Yes, I was. I was on the police beat for the Las Vegas Sun, so he basically was shot on my watch. And I was I went to the scene of the crime in the middle of the night. I got tipped off by a homicide cop and detective, and I went to the scene and covered it from that day forward, and it became my first book. And I've now written 11 books, but never intended to write a book. But the story wasn't solved, and it got under my skin because we all pretty much knew who did it. There was a lot of evidence, circumstantial but very good evidence, pointing to Orlando Anderson, a little gangbanger out of Compton, L.A., and so I just kept covering it and turned it into a book.
Okay, so now you hear about the shooting. Were you home in bed sleeping, or were you up, or what were you doing?
I was in bed sleeping when I got a call from homicide.
Okay, so you raced down there.
Just a good source who tipped me off, and I went to the scene, and then I just covered it from that day forward. I was there. He died, 6 days later, and I was at the hospital when he died on September 13th, Friday the 13th, 1996.
And which hospital? UMC?
September. UMC, University Medical Center, trauma unit.
Right. Now, where did the shooting take place? It was on the Strip, but where?
I was off the Strip, about a block and a half off the Strip, on Flamingo Avenue. And they'd been on the Strip, and they were just kind of cruising, and he was headed to a club to do a show, and a bunch of people were waiting. It was a private party, and Mike Tyson was going to be there. It was after the Tyson-Bruce Seldon fight, and they got him. They got him in a car-to-car shooting with a Glock, high caliber, right into the passenger side of the car, and got him. He was shot, I think, I have to look at it 4 or 5 times. One bullet ricocheted and hit him in a couple of places. And
Suge Knight was driving the car.
Suge got shot too in the back of the neck, base of his skull. He still got shrapnel. He's a tough dude. Suge Knight is, but he didn't have anything to do with this killing.
Well, where is he now? Is he in prison right now for something else?
He's not in prison. He's in jail, awaiting. He'll go to prison after he's convicted, but he's in jail in L.A. For the murder of one of the guys working on the set of Straight Outta Compton.
Right.
And he wanted his caricature is in. There's a character in the film, and he wanted to be paid for them using his name and his persona, I guess, and so he was trying to strong arm him and bullying him. He'd been talking to them the day before and that morning, and they just shined him on. He showed up where they were at a fast food place, I think, but I think it was part of the scene. It was one of the sets on the in the film they were shooting, and he shows up and ran over a guy not once but twice, dragged him, and killed one of them, and one of them was badly injured. Lots of witnesses, and it was videotaped. You can watch it over and over and over.
Yeah, that's right. He ran over this guy.
And he dragged the body. He didn't stop.
Right.
Terrible. terrible thing. So,
how old is he about now? He must be about 50 years old, 50, 60?
He's got to be close to 50. If not late 40s.
Okay.
I can't remember. I wrote about it recently, but I don't remember how old he is.
So now, you believe it's Orlando Anderson. Now, what gang was he involved in?
Crips.
Crips. Okay, that would be different.
Well, all the evidence points to it. I mean, you have to look at it. Tupac and for the listeners, Tupac was in town for both the Mike Tyson fight and for the party afterwards because he was doing a show, for people paid to go to it and for a private party, and it was partly community service too. That because Tupac got in trouble a lot too, and so Tupac was working off some time in community service. He could do shows and not get paid for them, and it was counted as community service. So he was in town for that, and they went. They were at the fight and left the fight and ran into Orlando Anderson, who was waiting for his homies to come out of the fight. And Orlando was just standing there, next to the elevator banks before you get to the lobby. And one of Tupac's buddies, Trayvon, I think is his name, or Trayon, recognized Orlando Anderson as a gangbanger out of Compton and someone who had stolen 2 months earlier from a Foot Locker store at Death Row, penned it off of one of the rappers from Death Row. And so Trayon whispers to Tupac, hey, that's little Orlando Anderson, who stole the necklace. And Tupac just jumped him, and everybody else joined in and dumped Orlando. And then about an hour and a half, 2.5 hours later, everybody knew where Tupac and Shakur were going to be. They were going to that party. It was advertised all over the black-owned stations, and flyers were everywhere. And if you were in town, and you'd know about that. And so they were headed to the Club 662 to retaliate, and they saw them in their BMW on the way. The windows were down. Tupac was jumping up in the sunroof and everything, waving at people, and they opened fire there instead of in front of Club 662. Orlando gun was found 2 months later in his house, but police didn't arrest him.
Well, why do you think that is? Because if it's an unsolved homicide, why wouldn't the cops go after Orlando?
They didn't want to. I mean, Compton police, they practically handed Orlando Anderson to them on a silver platter. I was told by higher-ups that it would have been bad for tourism. They were trying to turn it into a family destination at that point, and a family playground. And for whatever reason, they did not want to solve that crime. They didn't.
Well, what about all the stuff?
They would have had been in Compton. They would have taken it to the DA or to a grand jury. The least they could have done was take it to a grand jury and let them decide all the evidence, and they never did. I mean, you have motive. The beat down of Orlando Anderson, that's motive. You've got opportunity. They're in town. They know where he's going to be. And then you've got means, and that's a gun. That was a Glock. And the gun found in Orlando's house was a Glock. And Orlando was in town at the time. They've got him on videotape. They've got the beat down of him, so there's your motive. I mean, I think there was less evidence in the O.J. Simpson trial. Now,
the Glock that they found in Anderson's home, that was proven to be by ballistics, the same gun used in the murder?
It was turned out to be inconclusive, but they should have sent it to Quantico, to the FBI, and let them do it. Send it to the best lab in the country. They said it was inconclusive. But that's happened a lot. It doesn't necessarily, they took bullets out of Tupac's body, but, they have bone and everything else, and they're pretty much damaged when when they're hitting bone and doing damage to the body. It damages the bullet.
Now, that was the same incident that Suge Knight violated his parole, I believe it was, because he was seen kicking this guy, Orlando Anderson, as well, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the, he'd had some minor, no felonies, not really minor, some were assault, but in and out of jail, but no long term, but he was on probation or on parole, and violated it, and he's been in and out of jail ever since. Suge, that was the beginning of him going back in and out. But they were trying to get him, they get him for anything. I mean, once he was smoking weed in his car, and they pulled him over in, I think, Victorville, California, off Interstate 15 for smoking weed, possession of it, So they put him away for lots of things. That was a violation, too. Every time he turned around, she went back to jail. Only this one he's not going to get out of. He's in for murder now.
Now Suge, here in town, he's always had a lot of, because he was a UNLV football player, too. So he's always had a kind of, I would think, an easy ride. I would suspect he's gotten away with more stuff than he's gotten, overly charged with. Yeah.
Oh, he's stuffed the clients' heads down toilets. He's beating people with bats, if they want to sign a contract or, he was captain of the football team, and he left college, I think, after his junior year. He didn't graduate, but he was actually captain one year. And he was a business major. I verified all that with UNLV. And he grew up in Compton, but he had a full ride to UNLV and played high school football. So, but he was affiliated with the Bloods. Yeah. So you can take the kid out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the kid sometimes. And that was the case with Suge.
Yeah, I believe even he was accused of dangling. Who's the guy, the white rapper, Ice-T, out the window?
Yeah. I think he filed a complaint on that. Ice-T did.
Yeah, then he dropped it the next day.
Yeah, it was because he wanted out of his contract, right?
Right.
He wouldn't let anybody out of their contracts. He was tough to deal with, and he had that thug persona going on, and I think that's. Tupac was more of a thinker and very intelligent and a poet and an actor and a writer, and it was Suge who really pushed him to be more thug-like, and that who knows what, who he would have signed with if he hadn't signed with Suge, and what the course of his life would have been. But Tupac was already speaking at colleges and things like that. He was already almost a spokesman for his generation,
Oh, yeah. I was surprised to find out, because I had John Potash on the show, and he did a book about Tupac as well, to find out that Tupac Shakur his family was Black Panther Party for Self-Defense royalty. These people,
absolutely.
Yeah, and you never hear about that at the time.
Oh, his mom.
Yeah.
And Afeni just died, his mother, Afeni Shakur, but she was... she was part of the Panther, what they call them, the Panther 10 or something. And she, when she was, she was in jail when she was pregnant with him, but she was charged with murder in a federal offense because it was, I think, a federal building, a bombing of a building. And she was charged with murder in federal court, and she represented herself. I mean, his mother represented herself and was acquitted.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, these were brilliant people. These were brilliant.
Which is unbelievable that she did that. And, Tupac was absolutely his mother's son. Absolutely. And she was not, unlike Valletta Wallace, who I've interviewed at length, and it's, wonderful mother to Biggie Smalls, and, adored her son, but she's more about, Valletta Wallace has been more about seeing justice for her son, Biggie, whereas Afeni Shakur, justice wouldn't bring her son back. She was all about keeping his legacy alive. And she did a very, very good job of that.
Let me ask you this. First of all, one question. Now, the bullet wound to Suge's neck, a lot of people question that. Did you actually see medical records or anything like that, or did you see something?
Oh, you don't need this. I'll talk to the doctor.
Okay.
It's a bunch of hooey that it didn't happen. I mean, he was bloody, and there were people who saw him bloody, and he was in the hospital overnight and was released, and that came I don't need to see a medical record. I got it straight from the doctors.
Okay.
You know, they don't give you medical records. That's a privacy thing. And that, you know, you get it. Doctors don't lie. You know, I got it from a couple of different people, but he was injured with shrapnel and is still in his body, and it was bad enough they kept him overnight, and it was at the base of his skull and right above his neck.
Okay, now
so that's just conspiracy.
No, I know. My question was, I have a broader question.
I
have a broader question. Because now you got Suge here, right? Now, here locally, his attorney was like Oscar Goodman's, who was the mayor at one time, you know, a very powerful attorney here.
Yeah, Chesnoff.
Chesnoff, right. Now, so that's no slouch. Okay, you know, this guy had connections here in town.
He's a good attorney. He's good. He's gotten him off of a lot of things, but he didn't represent him in the Suge was never a suspect.
No. I know that.
They interviewed him as a witness, but he was never a suspect in Tupac's murder.
Right, I'm not getting to that. But my question is this, because he has these local connections. He's hooked up here locally. He's hung, you know. He's got connections. And then in California with Death Row Records, he had all kinds of ex-cops and even current cops working for him over there in Death Row. And Tupac had a whole security team of cops and ex-cops working for him here even that weekend. How was it?
Well, Frank wasn't an ex-cop. Frank said he was an orderly. Frank Alexander, the only guard on duty that night, was an orderly at the L.A. County Sheriff's Department. He wasn't a cop. I don't know that they were trained as police officers. They were mostly muscle. Or as security guards, they were mostly muscle.
Right.
But as far as saying he's hooked up, LAPD is a very large organization. He certainly wasn't plugged in at the top of the LAPD. It was mostly, you know, some of the cops who grew up in Compton and became cops and were his friends while they were cops too. And he wasn't. He hired off-duty cops in Las Vegas for the fight that night, but for the party. But that's common. People have parties and they have events and they hire cops. So he wasn't plugged into the Vegas police at all. He just happened to have Chesnoff as his attorney, but because he could afford him. But that doesn't mean he's plugged in. You know what I mean? I don't look at Suge Knight as being plugged into anything, and I mean they arrested him over and over in Las Vegas. He was arrested like 3 times there. I think one of the times he was still in college when he was arrested. So he was no friend to Metro, that's for sure.
Okay, but even in L.A., the L.A. County District Attorney had some kind of a deal where he was renting an apartment or a house from Suge. You familiar with that?
Well, there are lots. I've got a friend who was a deputy district attorney, and I thought it was the DA. It was a deputy district attorney. How many do they have? Yeah. But it's. I was told, that the LAPD had no jurisdiction over the Tupac case.
Right.
So because people don't understand, they think, well, why can't L.A. police, because that's where Orlando lived, don't have jurisdiction over it. Compton police didn't have jurisdiction over the case. It's a Las Vegas homicide case. Nobody else has jurisdiction, so it wouldn't matter who he's plugged into at the LAPD. They have nothing to do with the Tupac case.
Okay, but you don't think he had enough juice to put pressure on the local police and the local DA to get to move the prosecution forward?
That Suge had enough juice to move why would he want to move prosecution for? He took care of business himself. He said that on CNN.
Yeah. Okay, so did he take care of it?
They don't typically from the hood. He came up out of the hood. They don't particularly cooperate with police. So he's not he's not that kind of businessman where he wears a suit to work and he goes and he has a conversation with the DA's office, because he said on CNN, we'll take care of it ourselves, and he did.
They did.
The day there was a bloodbath for 11 days following the shooting of Tupac. And it continued after he died, 11 days straight. One of the shooters was killed, or not the shooter, one of the guys in the car was killed. Bloods attacked the Crips. Who do you think called that? He called that. He ordered it. Sure did. That's his retaliation for Tupac's death and for Tupac's shooting. Like he said, they took care of it themselves. He said it on CNN.
Okay. And so Orlando Anderson is dead today?
Died 18 months later in a drive-by shooting. It was a beef over money or drugs or something. It was at a car wash in Compton 18 months later.
Okay, so then really we're in a situation where no one can ever be arrested for this crime now, right?
Well, they can solve it. You don't have to be alive to solve a crime.
Mm-hmm.
They could say it was Orlando Anderson and be done with it, but they don't want to. I don't know, saving face because they didn't solve it before, and they don't care to solve it now. But they could, but they choose not to.
And what about recently? One of Tupac's bodyguards just died recently too. I forget the name. Was that
Frank Alexander committed suicide?
Oh, that was a suicide. Okay.
About a year and a half ago, too. His wife was a witness. Took a gun, they had an argument, and he threatened it before. He took a rifle, put it under his chin, and shot himself in front of her. And that was in Murrieta Springs, where he was living at the time. He was, believe, working as a guard at an AT&T store, security guard at an AT&T store when he died.
Makes you wonder, why would they even need a guard at an AT&T store?
I think people try to steal phones.
Oh, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, it's probably a big store.
Yeah, I mean, if you're at a mall, you'll see a guard at a door. That one, I bought a phone recently at Apple, and the Apple store here in San Diego had a guard at the door. Not at the door, they're just standing around. They're not armed.
I actually used to have one of those stores. I had a beeper and cellular phone company back in New York City back in the 90s. And we were in a kiosk right in the middle of the mall, so we could never. Had a fight for my phones myself with my own tooth and nail to protect my phones. Okay, listen, we're with Cathy Scott. We're going to take a little commercial break here, okay, while I reminisce over my fighting for my phones. We're with Cathy Scott. One book is The Killing of Tupac Shakur. Fascinating information. And then we're going to get into the murder of Biggie Smalls, right after this, which a lot of people think are connected, with the whole East-West Coast rapper kind of stuff. And then she was just telling us, too, about her other book, too, A Murder of a Mafia Princess, a Murder of a Mafia Daughter that we talked about the last time she was here, with the murderer Robert Durst. Okay, so we'll be right back after these messages with more Cathy Scott. Thank you so much. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. On our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we could trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh, boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the Opperman Report .com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations live Friday night and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod this and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air, you get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by the range covers 5 million people in population, where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and we're here today with Cathy Scott, who's talking about the killing of Tupac Shakur and also the murder of Biggie Smalls. And like I said, take a look back at an old show we did. Look for it on YouTube or Spreaker or iHeartRadio or even iTunes, Murder of a Mafia Daughter, where we talked about Robert Durst, because Cathy actually was friends with that woman who was killed by this Robert Durst character. So Cathy, a couple of things. Now, Tupac was also shot a couple of times in New York, right? And that's where Biggie Smalls was shot.
Yes, he was. Tupac shot in '94 at Quad Studios in Times Square. Basically, it looked like a robbery, but he thought that he was set up. But they stole $35,000 worth of jewelry, from him and a couple of guys, 3 or 4 guys he was with, and he lost a testicle in that shooting.
Oh, really?
But he shot himself too. He had a gun in his belt, and he was lifting it out, and he shot himself. But he got shot. A ring got shot up his finger, and he was out of the hospital the next day. But that was the first attempt at his life.
The one thing that always struck me about that crime scene, because there's video of it, after the shooting, is that the police were just letting people walk in and out of the building and stuff like that. You see Puffy Combs walking around talking on his cell phone like he owned the place.
The guys were just out front. you're looking at is the sidewalk, and they may have walked in and out of the lobby, but the cops were there and they made everybody stay. Everybody ran out as soon as the shooting went on. They tried to get out of the place, and so everybody ended up out front. And so the cops, he was there because he was being interviewed.
Right.
And yeah, probably on the phone, but Tupac was doing some backup singing for a group, and Biggie was there, and he ended up in jail on that sexual assault charge.
Right.
Tupac did, and while in prison, he was told that somebody told him Biggie set him up something, which he didn't. But that was the Quad Studio shooting was what caused the East Coast West Coast rap war. That is when the bad blood started between Tupac and Biggie. They were friends. Tupac helped make Biggie famous by putting him on stage with him, but that was when it started.
No, and there was one more shooting with Tupac too as well, where he actually pulled out a gun on some off-duty cops or some undercover cops and stopped.
Was that in Atlanta?
Oh, yeah, right. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't in New York or Vegas, right? It might have been Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of those. He didn't. I don't believe he was charged with that. It was a whole lot of stuff going on. I'd have to look up the case.
Okay. Now,
if I knew you were asking about it, I would have refreshed my memory on it. But he wasn't charged, and I don't think anybody was injured.
25 years old, and the guy's involved in all these shootings. It's incredible,
Well, he came out of the hood.
So did I.
He was. It's just sort of that mentality. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got that mentality going on now too, But I think there was a lot of shootings going along with that Biggie was around too.
Oh, really?
Just a lot of bad stuff going on.
So I was never a big fan of Biggie. So what was his story? He grew up as a drug dealer in the streets and then became a rapper?
No.
Okay.
He was a little small time, sold some dime bags on the corner or something, and that's all been blown out of proportion. He was a mama's boy. He grew up in Bed-Sty. His mother was a teacher, and he was an honor student in high school. Dropped out his junior year. He was rapping on the street corner, and wanted to do that instead, and met Tupac and some other people who helped push him along, and then he had a tape, in somebody's garage, and an old-fashioned tape recording, and Suge Knight heard it and signed him. I'm sorry, Suge Knight. Sorry, Bad Boy Records, Sean Combs. P. Diddy signed him and turned him into a star. He had his own following. He certainly wasn't the same persona as Tupac, but he had a great big following, especially on the East Coast. He's got he had people could said he had a velvet sound to his voice.
Mm.
Tupac was by far more successful than him, but once they both were more famous after death than before.
And there was something with Biggie Smalls' wife.
Oh, well, that was part of the East Coast West Coast rap war. They, back then, you remember in the '90s, they'd be dissing each other on albums.
Sure.
You did that. They, call each other names and call them out for whatever it was that wrong they did to them. Where Tupac said that he had relations with Faith Hill, his Biggie Smalls' wife, and said right in the album, "I slept with your wife."
Right.
And that caused more bad blood. And true or not, that it caused some more. But some people think that they each were killed because of that, but it didn't have anything to do with the East Coast West Coast war. With Biggie's is more complicated because he was in L.A. at the time, and he's in L.A. for 30 days, and Sean Combs hired Crips members as bodyguards, and the Crips shot Tupac, but Biggie got up on stage at the Source Awards while he was in LA, and it's like, "What up, Cali?" Throwing West Side signs, and he got booed. And then that was the night before he was killed, and he was hanging out with the Crips, going out to the parks and stuff because they were hired as bodyguards for them, and then he thought they were his homies, and so he was hanging out with them, and they were upset with him, and supposedly Sean Combs owed the Crips members for bodyguarding or owed them some money, and they retaliated, is what I heard. So that, but that's not even close to being solved.
What has Sean Combs ever publicly said about this? Has he ever made a public statement about this?
He was freaked out. I mean, when Biggie was killed, Snoop was freaked out. Snoop bought an armored Humvee after Biggie was killed because that's 2 rappers within 6 months. And then I think Little Kim was shot at outside Bad Boy Studios at some point. I think I wrote about that for the New York Post. And so you had, they were a little freaked out. So they all kind of kept low profiles for a while. Even Suge did, because they're it was like rappers were, had to be careful. But they get themselves, you hang around with the bad types of people, and it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah, there's actually a documentary out about death row that this guy from prison who talks about how he was a big crack cocaine supplier and how he funded death row to start with.
Well, Harry O.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Harry O. did time with Rick Ross. They were in a jail cell together for 5 years, and so Freeway Rick Ross, and I wrote his autobiography.
Oh, really?
And I wrote his autobiography. We'll talk about that sometime. You'll get Rick on the radio.
I got his phone number. He was supposed to come on, but he could never commit. Then he just got arrested again.
No, he didn't get arrested again. It was a few months ago, and he was driving while black in Northern California, and the charges, they're not filing charges against him, and now his attorney is negotiating release of some funds they took from him.
Okay, great.
But they didn't have any evidence to. He's clean. He's squeaky clean as he can be. He's one of my friends.
All right, great. See, I didn't want to bug him because I knew he had another case. I said, listen, I'll leave him alone.
No, he's not doing anything. But you got his latest number. I'll hook you up if you don't.
No, kids, please do, because we didn't want to bug him.
But anyway, he's. Where were we before?
He was with who's the guy?
Harry O.
Harry O.
He did time with Harry O. But Harry O. set it up. But Interscope, wasn't it Interscope? What was the name of the company that first hooked up with Suge Knight? Because what they do is they get an investor, and that investor then gets the big record company to sign, or however it is they do it, or fund. He funded them. But yeah, Harry, you look at the background and everybody he hooked up with, there's some steely characters connected to Suge Knight all the way through.
Yeah. So
except for college, he was pretty clean when he was in college.
So but as far as Biggie Smalls, that was it though. That just it was wrong place at the wrong time because he was with these Crips and Sean owed him money.
Yeah, it's just kind of retaliation. I mean, the thing is, there's nothing organized about gang members. They're not organized crime. They don't plan stuff. They just say, hey, let's go hit somebody, and they go hit somebody. You know what I mean? They don't. There's nothing. They're just gangbangers. With nothing better to do, and they've got guns, and they're young, and they're mean, and they go out and they do their thing, and they they're showing a lesson to Sean Combs or something. They're pissed off that Biggie was in town flashing West Side signs, and they have no value of life.
Yeah, and it's so true. And a week later,
nothing magical, nothing. No conspiracy theories, they're not organized crime. They just took him out.
It's so true. And then like 9 months later, they get caught up on another murder, and they're doing time for that other murder. Yeah, they forgot about the first one. And nobody even cares.
Yeah, then it's over. But, the interesting thing about Biggie Smalls, as the medical examiner said, and this will be included in the second edition, medical examiner said at the time that, he weighed 395 pounds.
Right.
Biggie Smalls did. He was morbidly obese, and he was sitting back. In order to sit in a car, and he's sitting shotgun, but in order to sit in a car, he had to sit way back. He had to recline. And he's in this great big, SUV and Suburban, and so his shots. Tupac died because of they couldn't stop the bleeding from the chest wound. He died from internal bleeding. With Biggie Smalls, he had sleep apnea. He just had a broken leg a few months before, and he was healing. He was walking with a cane. He's way overweight. And they said had he not been morbidly obese, he would have survived his wounds. Yeah, because it's hard keeping a guy like that breathing.
Yeah, right. You can't breathe.
Surgery and everything.
And how old was he?
He died during surgery. He was 24.
Oh my God! Can you imagine? 24 years old.
Yeah, morbidly obese. Yeah. 395. That's a lot of pounds. You're fat. Your heart is just loaded with fat.
Yeah, even if you're young and you still got your strength, that's my God. Now,
I mean, a person like that, you can die. I mean, who was the John Goodman? Was it John Goodman who was morbidly obese? And not John Goodman. Who was the
John Candy?
Actor who was
John Candy
and died. Yeah, John Candy, died in his sleep. So so Biggie could very well have done that. It didn't. When you've got someone that obese, and it's very, very difficult. I mean, you've got a smoker. I remember I had surgery. I don't smoke anymore. It's been years and years. But I had surgery, and the anesthesiologist just raked me up one side and down the other and said, "Do you have any idea what I have to do for you?" And I was young because you smoke. What the means I have to go to, the extent I have to go to keep you breathing while you're under surgery. So just imagine what it was like for him.
Yeah, that's true.
With a gunshot wound. Yeah, so it's sad when you think of it that way. He would have survived probably had he not been so overweight.
Now, Cathy, I know you said you had to go at 12 o'clock. So what else do you have coming up? What are you working on?
I'm working on. Oh God, I wish I could talk about it.
Oh no!
when I sign a contract, I will tell you. But there is an absolutely incredible story out of this. Is the second one I'm doing. 2 girls were murdered. Barbara Nanteus and Claire Huff, 14 and 15 years old, killed 6 years apart on Torrey Pond State Beach in La Jolla. Police said they solved it. I don't think they did. And they pointed at 2 dead guys, but they never could connect these 2 guys who are now dead. Could not connect them to the one girl's murder. The FBI for 20 years, one was in 84, one was in 78. FBI for 20 years said that it was both murders were committed by the same killer. They were mutilated sexually, strangled. And at night on the beach, about 200 yards away from each other, 6 years apart. And there's a neighbor who I think did it. So we'll talk about that at some point if we want to. It's a hell of a case. Absolutely.
Let me know what's going on with that. Cathy Scott, the killing of Tupac Shakur, the murder of Biggie Smalls, and of course, remember, go back to the archives, guys, and look up the murder of a mafia daughter. Cathy Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Okay, there you had Cathy Scott. Really good stuff. A couple of funny things here, because you know me, I got my own opinions, right? One is when Puffy Combs. Remember when he was with Jennifer Lopez and Puffy Combs, and that pregnant woman got shot in the hand in that nightclub back in New York City. It turns out some friends of mine back in New York were the first responders, let's call them, at the scene there. And there was a lot going on that never made it into the court, that never made it into the newspapers. I've heard this story, and other people have heard the story as well. And one is this pregnant woman screaming, "Puffy Combs just shot me in the hand. Puff Daddy just shot me in the hand." Okay, over and over. And the cops and the EMT guys literally putting their fingers in their ears, going, "La, la, 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 I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you." Okay, and that he was sitting there. They were all sitting there on the curb, which is you would think, which is what you do. You take all your suspects out of the car, you put them on the curb, like should have happened in front of at that 94 shooting in that building there. But instead of letting your witnesses walk around talking on the telephone, you have them all sit at this down to see what's going on. And money offers were being shouted out back and forth between all the occupants of the car. And then later on, someone did take the fall on that. The gun found in the car, and supposedly, who knows? Maybe we got a payment. Who knows? Who knows? We got it or not. And I think too, we were talking about, because I got to kill a little bit of time here. Is we were talking about having a security guard at a cell phone store, and as you know, I used to be in the cell phone business back in the 90s. Good long stretch of time, and I used to have these little kiosks in the malls. Back on the East Coast, Staten Island, New Jersey. For a little while, I had one at the South Street Seaport, and we had an office to manage everything. But we had these little kiosks, and I was the first guy in the whole country to go into a mall with a kiosk and sell cell phones. And when you see those little stands now where they sell the cell phone cases, and I was way before anybody on that. So you'd think I'd be a millionaire, right? But anyway. So one time, we were having a sidewalk sale. We had everything on discount, huge discount. All the cigarette lighter adapters, and the chargers and things. And some guy comes along and he says, well, I got this Mitsubishi, how do I know that's going to fit my phone? So I pull out one of the Mitsubishis I had on display, and I says, here, look, it fits. And I plugged it in. So he buys a cig adapter for like $1.50 because it was a huge sale. And he leaves. And about 10 minutes later, I look in the showcase and I see that the phone's gone. But what I did was, when I sold him the SIG adapter, he took the phone with him. I handed him the phone. I forgot that it was my phone. I thought it was his phone. So the guy stole the phone. I said, oh, man, I don't believe it. So we call the cops to make a report, right? Which is a waste of time anyway, back in New York especially. But about a week later, right? Because I wasn't there all the time. I just used to pop by, get the cash out of the thing, whatever, cash out of the drawer, make the deposits. You got to take a battery, a disk backup of the computers. A couple times, showed up a couple times a day. And I'm standing there, and some guy shows up, and he wants to get a refund for his SIG adapter. And I see the guy, and I say it's the Mitsubishi SIG adapter. I know it's the same guy. And I look at the girl behind the counter, and I says, is this the guy that stole the phone? And she goes, yeah, that's the guy. So I said to him, well, what do you want to return the SIG adapter for? And he goes, well, it doesn't fit the phone. I said, well, let me see your phone. So he hands me his phone, right? So now I got his phone, and he's got my phone. So I tell him, I says, hey, man, you stole my phone. I'm keeping your phone until you bring me back my phone. So me and this guy and I were fighting over this phone. And there was an undercover cop who worked at the mall, right? So I wave him over. Get over here, man. We got this guy who stole a phone. So this guy's, arguing back and forth about the phone, and I'm arguing back and forth about the phone. Because I got his phone. I stole the guy's phone in my hand. And the cop goes, okay, wait, everybody hold it. Who's got the phone? So at that point, I realized, oh, my God, I've just stolen this guy's phone. I'm going to get busted on this, right? So the cop says, I got his phone, but he stole my phone last week. Okay. And one of the girls working there says, yeah, he stole the phone last week. I recognize him. I'm a witness. He stole our phone. But it was last week. He has the phone home. And the guy's denying, I never took anybody's phone. I never took anybody's phone. So we start walking back to the mall security office, and I grabbed the guy, and I said, listen, man. I said, what are you doing? I says, just go get the phone. I'll give you your phone back. You give me my phone. Everybody's cool. And he goes, okay. I'll do that. So I said, all right, man, we got it all worked out. He's going to go get my phone. We're going to swap phones. So he goes home, and he gets my phone, and I got his phone still. And now he doesn't want to come into the mall. He's afraid to come back into the mall. He wants me to meet him out in the parking lot. I says, oh, man, you got a couple of guys out there that are going to beat the crap out of you with his stupid phone. It's worth like $150. The whole day's wasted. And so I brought with me, we used to have this big metal lock that we used to use to lock up the cart at night. So I brought the lock with me to hit him with the lock in case I had to fight this guy to swap the phones. But it turned out everything was cool. I met him in the parking lot, and we swapped out our phones. And he went his way, and I went my way. And that is the moral of the story of the guy who tried to steal my phone there at the good old front page beepers in the Staten Island Mall. Hey, God. And also, you should check out the shows we've done, too, in the past with John Potash about the murder of Tupac Shakur. He's done some really good work with more of a focus on FBI involvement and more of a focus on Tupac's involvement with the Black Panther Party for self-defense as a motive for his murder. And you can't exclude that being a motive for why this case was never prosecuted and why it was never followed up. And then no cops ever worked this case. Because there was an incident, too, I believe it was in Atlanta, where Tupac ran across two either off-duty or undercover cops beating the crap out of some guy, pistol whipping some guy, and he pulled out his gun, and they got into a little shootout, and he won the shootout. And he was never charged with that. So those are the kind of things you never get forgiven for, even after your death. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I don't know what I'm going to do with the show. If I'm going to see you next week, or if we're going to be doing an after show, or if this is the first part of the show. So, see you next week.